I joined the collaboration in 2010, which was just before the detectors shut down, before being made into advanced LIGO. And one thing I got a lot from astronomer friends was, oh, you're never going to see anything, and it's a waste of time. But I mean, it's really cool. Why, if there is a chance of detecting these things, then why on earth would you not work on it? I mean, I personally work on working out how giant stars explode when they die, and then looking at that by the ripples in space-time that a neutron star creates when it's formed. Why would you not work on it? I'm very much for the science that, may not be a sure thing at the moment, but it's interesting and it matters, and it's something that's important to look at, even though there might not be a payoff in the immediate future.
When I came in, I was contemplating taking a year off and doing some more theoretical work in another area of physics. And Alan, my advisor, told me, but right now is the right moment. We're about to detect these waves, like you don't want to miss out, like 1 year could mean that you miss it all out. And I was like, well, okay, and I believed him, and I was like, okay, and in the end, he was right? If I had missed this year, it would have been a year too late to be part of the whole excitement. But then I found out that people have been saying that for 30 years. So for 30 years, people were like, we're gonna detect it within the next year or so on. And so it was funny that I finally came at the time when it was actually true. So right place at the right time, definitely. And it's extremely exciting looking forward to see what's about to come, especially I think for young people like us. So it's a combination of years of work of a whole generation of scientists, but for us it's the start of this whole new era of science. And so to be part of this historical moment, I think is remarkable.
So what you guys are looking at are the different binary black holes that produce the gravitational waves that LIGO and Virgo have detected so far. The animation is showing you all of the different types of black holes that we've seen. See like their different shapes, their sizes, and by looking at the waves you can see like how far away they were. This is actually the first binary black hole that we've been able to detect.
Teresita is one of the undergraduate researchers in my group at Cal State Fullerton, and she's really stood out with her abilities to make visualizations of the calculations that we do.
Well, I've learned how to code in Python, something that I had never done before. I've learned a little bit about how to use like a visualization software like ParaView. It's kind of, for me, it was a little complicated, but I think I got a pretty good handle on it now.
She kept making fancier scripts to automate it so we could do more and more things, and she had faith that it was going somewhere, and then in the end she was able to make a movie that illustrated some of what LIGO's seen and shared it with a lot of people.
He was just thinking of like having a really cool project where I would have like 1 or 2 black holes on the same screen, and then we just decided to add more, and as we saw more like detections, we just kept adding and adding. So we have a supercomputer called Orca. It's here at Fullerton, and that does all of the simulations for us. The simulations can take anywhere up to a few weeks, sometimes months to run for each hole. So the whole thing together took almost like a year to make this entire project work. The goal is to be able to make one of these movies in like maybe 5 minutes, just like that. You can see that when they merged, I don't know if you saw, like there was a green color in the middle and some red. So that was just showing you like the curvature. So what you're looking at is at the shape of the black hole being distorted as they merge, because they're kind of like just merging together, and the colors are showing you the curvature. I generally didn't know a lot about physics. I was mostly curious, but I didn't get to really look into it in high school because I My counselor at the time didn't think it was something I should pursue, and back then I was really, I guess, like I was easily influenced, so I decided not to. I want to go to grad school, and I want to pursue a PhD in physics, and I want to continue research in gravitational wave physics. I think I want to stick with numerical relativity. It's something that I find really cool, and I've really enjoyed it since I started.
There's different ways to think about what happens next, right? And one of the main things is think about what we can do with this instrument to make it better, right? And I think the most immediate answer, beyond just getting advanced LIGO to the sensitivity it was designed for, is to inject squeeze states.
So, as people know that the interferometer is getting better and better, we are hitting the limit of the very basic noise limit, which is called quantum limit. It's surprising that we are using a 4-kilometer detector, but we need to concern that a tiny amount of noise. So for this quantum noise, it's a basic quantum limit that Heisenberg said that we have a limit that we cannot go through. And we are hitting that limit. So we began to think about the question that how can we go around that? How can we do better than this limit?
Is that you take the vacuum of quantum electrodynamics, the vacuum fluctuations of light, and you modify that vacuum by what is called squeezing, and you inject the squeezed vacuum into the back end of the interferometer. It sounds just crazy, but this turns out to be absolutely crucial for the future of this field. You modify the vacuum, you squeeze it.
So it's the vacuum that's squeezed or the laser that's squeezed?
It's the vacuum that's squeezed. But you squeeze the vacuum that's entering, and then that beats against the laser light.
It sounds like some superpower that we can squeeze the vacuum.
Quantum engineering of light. I love this. We're basically manipulating photons to do our beckoning.
We have a bunch of different squeezing experiments here. This one is a squeezing device that we're building here. We're testing and making a prototype here, and then when it's ready, we're going to actually install it in LIGO. And what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the quantum noise of our detectors, hopefully by a factor of 2. Our sensitivity will be increased by a factor of 2. And the idea is that that will increase the volume of space we can see by almost a factor of 10.
We are making the interferometer to look at the universe to detect the gravitational waves. And we are trying to make the range, which is how far we can see the universe, to detect gravitational waves. Okay, so here I'm showing the improvements that the squeezer is making for the interferometer. So this blue curve is showing that the sensitivity that we have without squeezing the interferometer. And this red curve is showing after we inject the squeezing, how much we improve. I always think it's like, the interferometer is like a tiger that is running really fast. And we put some wings for that, so that the tiger can fly.
The thing I see about squeezing that's so powerful is it's also, we can't conceive of any interferometric detectors that would not have squeezing. Every design we come up with will have will use squeezing to make it better. So I kind of feel like it's really, it's the path of the future.
Initial LIGO launched in 2002. One of the great breakthroughs in its instrumentation was made by Ray's graduate student, Nurgis Malvalala, and Barry's grad student, Matt Evans.
Well, I mean, just Nurgis is quite something. She did as a thesis, I think, one of the more important theses that was done here. Namely, she showed how you could use an idea that's been around but nobody had ever really made work. How you could align the interferometer. It's one of the more troublesome and difficult parts of the whole interferometer is that automatic alignment system.
So the problem of alignment in initial LIGO was that you have these two mirrors that are 4 kilometers apart, and you have to make them face each other with a tolerance of 10 nanoradians. Otherwise, the interferometer wouldn't work the way it's supposed to. So that was the challenge. Eventually, the way that we ended up solving this problem is the only thing that really talks to both mirrors is the light beam itself. So we understood that we had to use the laser beam to carry information about the angles of the mirrors. And we were already using the laser beams to give us information about the length of the separation. So we added another measurement, if you will, where normally you take a laser beam and you just measure all the power across the whole beam, just integrate over the whole thing. And we understood that if the mirrors were misaligned, the power wouldn't be distributed uniformly. It would have lobes of they're called modes. It would have different amounts of power in this quarter than that quarter. And so we actually measured different amounts of power across the beam, and that was, told us what the alignment was. So that was the solution.
And then she got a postdoc at Caltech, and she did a lot of things there, among them training Matt Evans. Matt Evans she wasn't a professor yet, but effectively Matt was her student. And they then did something spectacular on their own. They learned how to do something which none of us knew how to do. Namely, they got the interferometer at Hanford. They learned how to get it aligned because of her early work, but then also to get it into position so that it became sensitive. And what does that mean? That means you have to get the mirrors in the right place, exactly the right place, within much, much less than the size of the wavelength of light, positioned properly so that all of a sudden the entire interferometer lights up. That's called locking the interferometer. And that was a relief for the entire project because it had never been done before.
That was the kind of first light in the interferometer, and it was a very exciting time for me because it was my thesis work, but I think also for other people. It was a great time because it was the first time we had seen really the interferometer operating in the way that it ought to.
I had the advantage of being brought up by a mechanical engineer. My dad was someone that I loved very much and really admired, and he brought that engineering approach to life, for good or for bad, to everything that he did. And I knew that I wanted to be a mechanical engineer like my dad when I was very young. Now, I also had the goal of having a Corvette by the time I graduated college. That was a help. So it seemed to really be an easy fit for me because I could see myself in what my dad was doing. I've been doing outreach for junior highs and high schools, and college too a bit, but I think junior high is their key years for girls. I usually give a talk about how I got into engineering and why I got into engineering, and generally I do bring up my Corvette. I bring up my pay as well. I make a good living, and that's important to a kid who's living, for example, in East LA. It's become quite important for me to try to work with especially younger girls in junior high and high school and to say, this is what it looks like to be a mechanical engineer. This is what it looks like to work every day with your hands and with your brain. I think we really need to encourage young girls to make their future by their brain and not by their looks, because that's the strongest thing you can bring to the table for your whole life.
In terms of the Nobel Week, it's hard if you ask me, what's the most meaningful part of that? Sitting next to the Queen, which I did, or walking with this beautiful princess, or all this, that's all great fun. It's hard to say that anything's more meaningful than the actual ceremony where you're handed the medal and document, a certificate by the king. But I would say that another part of it actually got to me much more and was totally unanticipated. The ceremony Afterwards, what people don't realize is they come up and they take away your medal and take away your certificate, not for good, but because they don't want you to lose it. Each of us have an appointment where you went to the Nobel Foundation offices, and one of the things, you sit down and they give you the medal and this and that. And then a book opened up to a page that had 2017 on the top, and you just signed it. So there was nothing else but signing it, except that if you look back at the page before, it was 2016, the page before that, 2015, and so forth. So, I could look back to see Feynman's signature or Bohr or Shelley Glasgow or anybody that I knew. To actually feel that I'm in the same book as these guys had a huge impact kind of emotionally on me. It was paging back, which I did, that really got to me.
The universe has been expanding since the Big Bang, and the bigger it gets, the faster it expands. The Hubble constant is the quantity that sets the scale for this expansion. And astronomers have been trying to pin down this number for more than 80 years. There are different measurements that are not too far away from each other, but not in comfortable agreement quite yet. What LIGO and Virgo have done using this latest data is to introduce a new method completely independent. This is a method that was first proposed 30 years ago by Professor Bernard Schutz, who's here in the audience with us today. And the idea is to use the signal, the gravitational wave signal from the two neutron stars to measure its distance from Earth. And so now we have a new yardstick, a new standard siren that's going to allow us to measure the expansion of the universe.
Yeah, that was something I did in 1986. So we've been waiting for a long time to be able to apply it. At the time, it was a very big thing in astronomy to measure the rate of expansion of the universe. And I realized that we had another tool for measuring the Hubble constant. So that was what I wrote in my paper. Here's how to measure distances, and here's how to use it to measure the expansion rate of the universe.
Bernie's pretty amazing. He's done so much great work, and there was one paper in particular which really, left an impression with me, which was this paper where he first proposed doing measurements with gravitational waves and coupling them with electromagnetic measurements, this multi-messenger astronomy, and thought it would be a new way to make fundamental measurements in cosmology. The truth is, it seemed like a fantasy. It was one of those papers, it's beautiful, wouldn't that be neat? But that's never going to happen. Some number of years later, I realized, with a number of people, that gamma ray bursts would be a very natural way to do this sort of measurement, and wrote some papers about it and kind of really started to develop this, how would it work in practice? But to be honest, even when I was writing those papers and giving talks and trying to get the community excited, in the back of my mind, I still thought it was a fantasy. Like, this would never happen, or, maybe it'll happen, but it's still a long, long way away. 2 weeks ago, there was no such thing as gravitational wave cosmology. There was barely gravitational wave astrophysics. And now there is an actual gravitational wave cosmology result. It's remarkable. One moment to the next. I get on an airplane convinced that, things are going fine, but there's this major goal of my career, which may or may not happen in my lifetime. And I land, and it's essentially, in process. And by the time I went to bed, which was actually the next morning, it had all been done. That it can all change that quickly. It's incredible. I just, even now, I can't believe it's really happening. I get kind of emotional. We're lucky. Good time to be alive.
We have searches that look for things that we can't explain, possible gravitational wave sources that we didn't expect. to look for the unexpected, of course, is one of our real challenges. And that, of course, is very hard. It's It's easier to make a detection when you detect something that you expect to see, like a binary black hole. If you detect something that you hadn't thought you would see, you want to do even more to verify that it's not an artifact of the instrument or of the way you're analyzing the data. So those things would get looked at very, very hard. The classic example or scenario for an unexplained source would be we'd see something happen, a blip that looks the same in both detectors. It comes in within the time of being a gravitational wave, so within plus or minus 10 milliseconds. And yet we don't have any model of anything to say that's what this is. Then there's a process that we go through of looking for other possible sources for that. Could it have been a lightning strike? Could it have been magnetic fields? Could it have been cosmic rays? Once they've eliminated everything we can understand, then the only conclusion we could come to is that it's a gravitational wave. And then we put it out, we publish it to the scientific community, say this is a gravitational wave that we don't understand. Tell us what you think it is. And that's when the fun starts to happen.